We have breaking news on CBS Sports HQ. The Boston Celtics have found their new head coach. According to multiple reports, it's Nets assistant Ime Udoka. Now, you might not be that familiar with Udoka, but a lot of Celtics players are. Udoka was an assistant coach for Greg Popovich during the 2019 World Cup. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, all on that team. And they all reportedly had great things to say about Udoka, and that was undoubtedly one of the reasons why the Celtics have made this move today. He was a Spurs assistant under Greg Popovich for many years, then moved on to the 76ers last season, and just this past season was a Nets assistant coach. And the Nets were the team that eliminated the Boston Celtics in the first round of the playoffs this season. Brad Stevens leaving his post as head coach and making this hire after moving into the front office. Let's get a look at the timeline for a busy offseason so far for the Boston Celtics. After being eliminated June the 1st, Danny Ainge stepped down. Brad Stevens was named president. Then they traded Kemba Walker to the Thunder. And now, according to multiple reports, hiring Ime Udoka as head coach just over 3 weeks later. Let's bring in our NBA insider, Bill Reiter. Bill, I'm not sure that a ton of basketball fans are that familiar with Ime Udoka, but as I mentioned, these Celtics players are, and it seems like that was the deciding factor. Their young stars liked him, and Brad Stevens rewarded them with their guy.
Yeah, and Chris, you laid it out. I don't know Udoka well at all. I do know that he's been a name that circulated really for the last 18 months as a sure thing eventual head coach. And I think it's his experience with the international, the U.S. men's team, where he really met a lot of people and impressed a lot of people. But you're right, the resume is pretty impressive. Was an assistant under Greg Popovich. We've seen over the years, and even now, if you go that route and you impress Pop, you become somebody who's widely respected around the NBA. Obviously was in Philly and then with Brooklyn. So this is a guy, not a household name, not even a household name to some of the folks who cover the NBA, but somebody out there that folks knew would eventually get a head coaching job. And it certainly sounds like Brad Stevens, with all the turmoil we've seen in Boston, wanted somebody not just impressive, he's impressive, but certainly is liked by the players. And the expectation is he'll be able to connect in a real way in a locker room immediately.
Why was that so important to them, Bill, to find a coach who was more player friendly?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of dysfunction in Boston for a long time. Look, when Kyrie Irving came into Boston, there were problems, and some of the folks on that Celtics team would tell you that Kyrie was the problem. Some of the folks would tell you that Kyrie wasn't the problem. He was misunderstood. Kyrie goes away, and you still have some issues, including at times Brad Stevens clearly not connecting with his guys. I'm told part of the reason he made that move is he felt like his voice wasn't heard anymore. You're talking about a Celtics organization that absolutely has two young stars. They have high aspirations, and they just felt like within that organization, of course, you want a great coach, someone who can do the X's and O's, but you look to Monty Williams as a great example. Somebody who can do those things, but connect with players who guys want to be around, who guys want to fight for. It's really important in the modern NBA, and they feel like they found that in this new hire.
It's going to make players feel good right now, but how much of a gamble is it to go with a first-time head coach in an effort just to please your young stars right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a huge gamble, and I think, Chris, I think you and I even talked about this maybe a week or so ago, that Brad Stevens was almost inevitably going to go with somebody new, somebody different, somebody that was a gamble. That is certainly, and it was speculation, right? Not source material, but talking to executives around the NBA and sources, that was the speculation on Brad Stevens, because he's a bit of an outsider. This is a guy who, I'll never forget this. Usually in my job, I have to call sources and try to get them to call me back. When Brad Stevens got hired years ago, I was driving in to a movie lot of all places in LA. My phone rang. Was a prominent coach in the NBA who never called me. He would call me back, never called me cold, to politely tell me why Brad Stevens was going to fail, why you couldn't make that jump from the college level to the pro level successfully. And obviously, and that guy's a pretty well-respected dude, it didn't go that way. Stevens has always been an outsider, came from Butler. Most people didn't think he was going to make it. Danny Ainge is a bit of an outsider and a maverick. We've seen that before. Guys like Anthony Davis, his family saying that they'd never want him to play there. And so Brad Stevens' route, the doubt that people showed to him, the fact that he's not really, I think, a part of that club, always pointed to the fact he was going to do something bold because he sees the game and he really sees the landscape to being successful a little bit differently than some of the other GMs around the NBA.
Ime Udoka is going to be the next head coach of the Boston Celtics. What are some of the issues that he's going to be walking into and having to deal with right away with this roster?
Well, I mean, you have no Kemba Walker and no Kyrie Irving before that, so you're going to have to find a primary ball handler and really a third star. I think the development of Jaylen Brown is going to continue to be really, really important. Jason Tatum, I think it's agreed upon, and it should be agreed upon, is a superstar, an emerging star, whatever you want to call him. I really like Jaylen Brown a lot as a player, but he needs to continue to take a leap or two forward if he's going to be the second best player, if you believe he can be the second best player on an NBA team. And I think like Al Horford, right, back into the mix, and you sort of dive into his per 36-minute numbers. That's a guy who can give you some output. So how many minutes you give him will be interesting. Marcus Smart really was in a lot of ways an extension of Brad Stevens on the floor. Typical Brad Stevens player. You want to make sure that he buys in. So I think it's looking at the core, right, the stars and some of the role players and secondary players, and just making sure that they're on the same page. There's some happiness in that locker room, and there's a sense with that organization, the actual players, that there's a plan, and that the new head coach knows what he's doing and has their best interest at heart.
Okay, so we're now down to 6 coaching vacancies in the NBA as the Celtics are reportedly set to hire Ime Udoka, who was an assistant with the Brooklyn Nets this past season. Bill Reiter with us here on CBS Sports HQ as we take a look at the remaining vacancies. You have one in Indianapolis, in Orlando, Portland. In Portland, might be going after Chauncey Billups. That was a guy that Boston was looking at as well. Who's going to be the next head coach is Zion Williamson in New Orleans. The Wizards and Mavericks also with vacancies. So 1 down, 6 to go in this NBA offseason as Brad Stevens hires Ime Udoka, according to multiple reports, to be the next head coach of the Boston Celtics.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.